Committee meeting and our Director of People and Development. And also welcome colleagues from the Trade Unions, Staff Association and HMICS. Now, I know there have been recent changes in personnel at the Police Federation, so Lorna Cunningham, I believe, is here for the first time, or you've recently taken up post as Deputy General Secretary, and would like to congratulate you on that and welcome to the meeting. Just in terms of the way that things work for the People Committee, just a reminder to people who are here for the first time and those of us who perhaps have been here for a bit longer, in terms of contributions, I think sometimes it's helpful just to provide that clarity. So members obviously are here in terms of as being members of the committee and will be asking questions after papers are presented. Then the trade unions, staff associations can comment, not ask questions, but can provide comment with wider perspectives. And then members can obviously have the option to have some further follow-up questions. So that would be the running order of the day. We've got apologies from Alistair Hay. Deborah, anyone else that we've had? I know that ASPs are unable to send a rep today, so we'll note that their apologies, so we're all right. We've not had any declarations of interest notified in advance. Any other notification of declarations of interest, members? No. So we now need to make a decision about taking decisions in private. Can I ask that members agree to take agenda items 7 to 11 in private? Okay. And just confirming, and although we can go over the arrangements when we move into private session, the running order of the private session would be that staff associations and trade union colleagues are very welcome to join us for items up to and including 9.1, and thereafter the other two items would be for members only with the minimum support from Police Scotland and the authority meeting. So moving on then to minutes and actions from previous meeting. The minute of the previous meeting, are people content on accuracy? I'm looking at the body language and taking that to be a yes. And any matters arising that aren't already flagged on the agenda? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so we're approving the minute, Deborah, and no matters arising. In terms of then of the rolling action log and as well as the matters arising, is there anything on the rolling action log that people want to raise? I'm going to suggest we maybe run through the meeting before we necessarily close aspects off. In terms of taking that forwards, anyone have anything that they want to raise on the rolling action log? That okay, so we can do that at the end of the. Deborah, if you can remind me, please, to do that before we go into at the end of the public session, that we can take that forwards. And we've had no decisions since our last meeting. So I think we're going to move on now to the wellbeing and inclusion aspect of the agenda and the Q3 wellbeing report. Susan, are you going to take us through this?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. As always, I will take the paper as read, and I will call out some key points from that paper. So starting off with our training programme, as we know, that continues to provide invaluable trauma support to our people across the organisation. We currently have 200 trauma assessors, and the current cohort are in the midst of receiving their annual refresher training that's being arranged currently. On top of that, we have 38 new trauma assessors being inducted, and they also are receiving their initial training, with the last one running toward the end of March. Moving then into some communication and engagement, we have recently just launched what we're calling the Health Wellbeing Lived Experience series. That launched in December. The Lived Experience series is whereby we have officers and staff across the organisation who are looking to share their own experiences and stories, often relating to mental health, etc. The first of the series ran in December, with the focus being around about mental health and the Christmas festive period. I'm looking a little bit at the cost of living crisis. Again, we got a lot of good feedback on that particular one. We then rolled into number 2, which was last month, which was on the subject of suicide. So quite an impactful one. We had a video and a written piece from one of our officers on the front line and a member of staff working in our ICT function. So again, the feedback coming through is very much on the basis of it's to break down stigma, it's about mental health, and we are getting a lot of calls coming into my wellbeing team, particularly about the impact that that's having. We intend to run another 4 of the lived experience pieces, and then we'll do a review thereafter to determine the next steps. Next, I want to cover a little bit about the wellbeing champions. Again, we have 130 wellbeing champions currently. They are in the midst of going through the annual CPD programme and refresher training, and we've put out a kind of mini advert, if you like, for notes of interest to attract more wellbeing champions. I think it's quite useful to have a refresh in that particular area, and we have a lot of interest in people from across the organisation expressing an interest to be a wellbeing champion, which I think is really, really valuable for the organisation. Again, moving just briefly into the Health and Wellbeing Advisory Group. I think previously one of the people committees we spoke about the introduction of the Health and Wellbeing Advisory Group. It's established to allow our people across the organisation to have a voice, to share experiences, to bring our people into the fore, and to hear about good practice that currently runs across the organisation. It then feeds into the Health and Wellbeing Governance Board, which in turn then feeds into people committees. So delighted we've had our first advisory group that ran in December, and we have our next one scheduled for April. And again, it's to allow our people to come to us and talk about what else we can or cannot be doing across the organisation in the wellbeing space. Moving on, flu vaccination, we saw 1,005 officers and staff take up the offer of the flu vaccination. Similar number to last year, to be fair. That tends to be around about the 1,200 mark, so no real surprises in there. Again, the organisation reimbursed the cost of that vaccination for those people. We also have concluded a deep dive review into psychological long-term absence. We look back over the last 9.5 years of our long-term absence. That will feature later on in the agenda. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the private session. Looking into the occupational health EAP contract, as you committee members know, we are looking at the tendering for that for the next for 2024 onwards. We have had 7 providers in under the RFI process to start talking about the offering that we can be looking to expect for the future. It's been a really good exercise. It allows you to see what's out there, what good looks like, to allow us to make sure we get it right for 2024 onwards. So the tendering for that, the formal tendering will be put out to the market. We're looking at around about April time. That will be formally floated onto the market, and we'll start looking at the tendering for companies to come forward. And finally, a little bit on ill health retirement and IOD. So I know this is an area that we're particularly interested in. Since the paper was written, we have again reduced the pool and the timeline. So we're now looking at, there's 89 officers in that pool looking at ill health retirement. It's now reduced down to a 10-month timeline. I think the paper says 13 months. We'll reduce it down further. And again, by June, we will have reduced it down to 8 months. And the reason why we are seeing such a significant reduction in that area is ultimately we're working with Optima to get more SNP appointments. We're now seeing an average of between 20 and 25 appointments per month, which compared to the last, if you look back 6 months, we were seeing about 5 to 7 appointments per month. So it's significantly increased. So we are ultimately looking at, by the end of June, to have the process reduced as close to 6 months as we can make it, providing appointments continue as they are, and we have a good support from Optima and confirmation that is likely to be the case. So we are tracking quite nicely in that area. That's all I wanted to cover for the purposes of the paper, and happy to take questions.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks very much indeed. Members, questions? Well, the members are considering any questions, because that was a helpful report. Thank you, Susan. Can I just ask, in terms of the whole paper, what are your recommendations and conclusions that you would be wanting to advise us about as a consequence of the paper from an assurance point of view?
It's a quarterly update report, so ultimately what the paper does is look back the last quarter to provide committee with assurances around about the activity that we're delivering against. So the recommendations are that we note the activity has been supportive in terms of our wellbeing offering to the organisation.
Okay, and so the activity is there, and there's clearly a lot of activity going on, but in terms of the effectiveness of the activity, I wonder if you could say a bit about how that gets measured so that we can have assurance that the wellbeing of the workforce is being maximised.
Yeah, okay, so we have 9 action plans running behind all of this, and I think if you remember back to, I think probably about 4 committees ago, we brought our statement of intent, and within that it details the activity that we are delivering against. With the development of the people strategy, what that now does, we have a plan that sits behind it. It links to the people strategy, and it tracks progress. We needed to wait until it was slightly more mature to allow for evaluation to take place, because it's ultimately you can't wait it until it's, you know, the actions have been received, so to speak. My intention would be to use those actions to provide the evaluation and update to the committee, to allow you to see the traction, if you like, that shows progress. My intention would be to start looking at the evaluation in probably the next committee coming here in June.
Okay, Susan, that's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. I'm not seeing any of my fellow authority members with questions, so I'm going to then bring our colleagues, our staff side and trade union colleagues in. Michelle, then Lorna.
Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose if I had any influence and questions that the authority members might want to query on is around the tender process for the occupational health services. I don't think it would come as a surprise that this is an area where we found a lot of frustration in representing our members in the delays in that area. And if I remember, quite a significant time ago, probably in the Strathclyde days, when occupational health had went out to tender, there was some involvement with the trade unions around that process. I think this is an area we could improve on greatly. I think it's really important that we use an opportunity to potentially involve the trade unions in that procurement exercise.
Michelle,
and the only other comment I kind of wanted to make is, for me, it's always important to flag our forensics colleagues, the frontline forensics colleagues and staff in that area who continually on a daily basis actually work in quite traumatic events over a sustained period of years. We do see colleagues in that area potentially leaving ill health retirement, but is there something that we could and should be doing around their well-being before it reaches those stages? I know within certain areas in cybercrime we've improved, you know, what we can do for members in that area, members of staff in that area, and it would be nice to make sure that we're covering forensics frontline staff and everything when it comes to well-being. But are we going above and beyond in terms of trying to be proactive and protecting them as well in the work that they do?
Okay, that's really, really helpful, Michelle. I'm going to take a couple of comments and then see if any of the members want to ask questions, but that's helpful for that feedback. Lorna?
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. I just really wanted to comment on the vaccinations. I remember in the past it was a voucher scheme that was issued to officers. My concern is that it's a rather low uptake, and is that because there's an upfront cost to officers, given how pinched their purses are just now with the other financial constraints? It just wondered if that was maybe prudent to return to a voucher scheme where the outlay was not on the officer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lorna. Colleagues, any questions that people want to ask? Okay, so can I ask then, Susan, trade union, oh sorry, Tom.
Thank you. just on the point Lorna made there, which is very valid about uptaking vaccinations. I know that for some members of the double jab they've been provided through the surgery, so it might account for some of it, but that's not to take away from the fact that the uptake is very, very important. So it might be worth what measures can be taken to assess that uptake, you know, in terms of those who haven't. That'd be really helpful. My main focus, my question around this and the tendering process that Michelle brought out as well was there's no doubt the lack of access to medical practitioners has been a real issue. And so apart from the tendering process, are we satisfied now that bottleneck in the system has gone, or is it only away temporarily?
And Susan, maybe while you're responding to Tom, you could also talk about the procurement and whether or not trade union and staff side feeding into that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can do. So a couple of things ITT wise in terms of that aspect, 100%. And I know Michelle, you raised it specifically, but 100% engagement with the Scottish Police Federation, AST and unions around about what that spec looks like. So that when we go out to the market, we're asking for a product that the organisation wants and needs, and that we get it right. I think I'm probably quite vocal on this subject because we need to get it right. It comes up a lot. It's important. It's a service that we offer. It's an expensive contract, so we need to, and it's a long contract once we get it in place, so we need to get that right. So to answer the question, yes, staff associations and unions will be engaged in the ITT part of that process. Again, yourself, Tom, about the voucher scheme, the flu vouchers, we've had a varying degree of feedback around about voucher versus, and I think it was yourself, Lorna, that mentioned the voucher versus the old style of, you know, you've got an upfront, you know, we give you a voucher rather than you claiming it, reimbursing it. Ironically, the feedback that we get is that they prefer the voucher scheme because it's easier and quicker for them to get access to. I don't have any assessment on why the number is as low, other than it has never really fluctuated, even in the old scheme compared to the current scheme. We do publicise it, we promote it, we advertise it, we have people partners out promoting it, etc. And I'm not quite sure what else we can do. It's in toolkits and line managers briefings. It really is everywhere. It is down to personal preference, and we do reimburse very quickly. Finance have been outstanding, ensuring that people weren't out of pocket for very long to get that reimbursement process in. And we can certainly look at doing more for next year, but the feedback is prefer the current system than the old one. Anecdotally, that's came into my team.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Paul.
Yeah, it's just in response to the point about forensics and the staff there, which I think is a point well made. We do, just to provide some assurance, that we do actually, as you know, Chair, because you sit in the committee that I chair, but we do look at that at Forensic Service Committee meetings on a very regular basis, and it is something that's very much uppermost in our minds.
And I think if some authority officials could probably confirm this or otherwise, we are having a conference or a round table on psychological safety and psychological well-being, and forensics, I think, are, well, not I think, I know that forensics are involved in that, and the trade unions also should be involved and associated with that. But if not, Michelle, then we'll make sure that Unison and others are involved in that. Okay, I think I'm now going to move on if there's no further questions or comments. And I think, Chris, we're over to you in terms of ill health retirement.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I was just going to say a few words by way of introduction before handing over to my colleague Jackie Kitch, who's going to talk through the detail of the report. I suppose the first thing to say is that ill health retirement and entry on duty are topics around which there's been a high level of interest, and I think rightly so. And these are topics that both the authority and I believe Police Scotland take very seriously indeed. And it's on that basis that I wouldn't see this update as being any kind of end point in terms of what it is we need to achieve here. We will continue to push into this area, and I think what we'd like to do is continuously come back to the committee until that's no longer required until we believe that we've got to what you might reasonably conclude as a reasonable endpoint in terms of our ambition in the space. Now, this improvement activity was actually kicked off back in 2019, and I think the impact of COVID shouldn't really be understated, and this is something we've heard about over the last couple of years and discussed, I think, at some length in terms of the impact it's had not only on the improvement activity, but especially on the level of service provided over that period as well. So it has been something that we've really needed to address, and I think we're all kind of coalescing around having to do something about this and really lean into this area. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the engagement with, I think, the Police Federation in particular, and understanding the experiences of their people, I think is going to be really important in how we shape this process going forward. So I'm really pleased that engagement has started. Lorna, I know you were part of that, so you've got my thanks for that. And I think I look forward to that continuing as we continue to kind of, like I say, lean into this area. So that's all I was going to say, Chair. So with your permission, I would just like to hand over to Jackie at this point.
Of course,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'll not say much more, but just a kind of few words to add to what Chris has said there. So the importance of this meant that it was part of the SPA business plan for this year, that commitment to do the review of the kind of joint review of ill health, retirement and injury and duty. So initially there was some work done to focus on the legal arrangements underpinning the process, and that initial part is has concluded, and there is an update on the paper on that, and that then allowed us to move into actually looking at the kind of process itself. As Susan update on the last item highlighted, the really hard work undertaken by Police Scotland to increase the number of selected medical practitioners that were involved in this work, and also those number of appointments that were available to our staff. So that's been a huge piece of work that Police Scotland did and took forward, and it's really made a difference to the numbers that are currently in the process. Again, the paper highlights some improvements that have been made around the management of the process, and with the focus purely on improving the experience of the people who unfortunately find themselves in this process. We are continuing to work, as Chris kind of highlighted, and now kind of trying to look at the kind of longer term improvements that might be able to be made. And we will obviously, as we identify anything, we will go through any specific mechanisms that we need to do to make sure that we can implement any of them. Engagement with the SPF, as Chris again alluded to, has commenced and will continue, and we will continue to update the committee. And Susan gave some verbal update on that kind of work to reduce the backlog and the kind of modelling of when we might get ourselves into a more sustainable place, and we will make sure that's in the kind of written update to the committee next time round. Happy to take any questions that members might have on the paper.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Members, any comments or questions? No, could I ask then, Jackie, and whether it's you or Susan? So I think very helpfully you've talked about the additional SMPs and additional appointments. I think it would be helpful, and it may well have been to the committee already, and I may well have seen it, and if so, apologies. I think it would be helpful for me to understand what the end-to-end process is in terms of what the ideal should be and what our intention would be, recognising people's health ebbs and flows. So that final decision when to refer for ill health, retirement or injury and duty is a moment in time, which is maybe a movable feast. So I think it would be helpful either if we have that, if we've already had that, if it could be resent, or if not, if it could come back, and so that we can map against where we currently are with where we want to be. And Susan, I think we already had a conversation about this either at a deep dive or last time, for saying, well, actually 6 months is probably an on balance reasonable time for that to be there, and we're planning to be there for June.
So, Chair, I think part of that has probably been shared with the committee before, but what I would probably propose to do is just work with Susan to kind of maybe pull it out a bit further into that kind of full end-to-end. I think the document that was shared with members earlier was very much focused on the ill health retirement process and what happened when officers then ended up in that. I think what you're asking for is actually a wee bit of an understanding of the wee bit before that as well, of how they then. So happy to engage with Susan so that we can bring that forward and give members that assurances.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Chair. So I know the review's focusing on the process and the recruitment of the medical examiners, etc. And that we're getting an update on that. But the sort of broader context of this was certainly when the Parliament showed interest in it, officers who gave evidence there raised issues, not as well as the process, but also about the support that was available as we went through all this. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that and what can we do to improve that.
Sorry, I'll let Susan come in if she wants to afterwards, but all I would say is that's what we mean by, so the process, I don't just mean so that's involved in what we mean by improvements in the process, is improvements of the kind of experiences of the officers that have found themselves in the process.
Mm-hmm. The reality is that feedback from officers in that is it's not as strong as we would like it to be.
And that's why the engagement with the Federation, I think, is really important as well, so that we can, firsthand and earlier hear that feedback and hopefully make any changes, updates that are required, in the moment, rather than sometimes when we hear it, it's almost, I don't mean too late, that's not what I mean at all, but it's it's happened, but it's what can we then do to improve it and make sure that we put things in place to make sure that those experiences aren't the same experiences other officers then have.
So are we confident that we've addressed these issues? We're actively making progress in addressing these issues? We
absolutely are, yes. So lots of the improvements that have been put in were directly in response to some of that feedback that had been received. So I think you've seen the paper, it talks about single points of contact so that officers know who their named person is, they know who that person is, it's going to give them those updates. So we're absolutely confident that we are making good strides in that space.
Thank you.
And how will we know, Jackie?
And that's where I'm hoping the Federation will be able to help us so that we can get that direct feedback from the Federation and from via officers that have been in the process and, and the experiences of those officers. So
systematically, we would be looking for feedback,
yes,
rather than anecdotally.
Yes.
Okay, and
that's what Lauren and myself discussed last week. Is that way we can systematically get feedback from the Federation to make sure that we're comfortable that the process is working as it's intended to.
And Unison and Unite would also be.
So this is an ill health retirement process specifically for officers, but we can extend that out into that kind of staff arena as well.
Okay, and do we have the same problem for staff rather than officers?
It's not, again, probably Susan or Nikki would be able to give you specifics on that, but I'm not aware of the same level of feedback in the staff arena. It seems to, it's much less common, the numbers are lower, so therefore there's not the same levels.
So, and it would be helpful to probably have that formally to the committee. So I saw Lorna, then Michelle and Derek. I'll ask you as well if you want to comment. So I think Lorna first.
Thanks, Chair. Just first of all, I didn't receive the paper for this, although Jackie did give us quite a comprehensive update when we met just recently, but it would be useful to just get a look at that just to see where we are with the review. Yeah, just to endorse what Jackie said, the experiences we have of officers who've went through a slicker process recently is that it's been much better for them. And I know we will tie in, obviously, to ensure that any problems are getting ironed out, along the way, rather than it being after the event, someone giving us a negative experience. But we were delighted with the update from Jackie and our colleague the other day, just to say that what has been taken on board and the changes they propose to make. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Lorna. Michelle?
I suppose all I would come in and say is I would agree with Jackie, the numbers in terms of staff going through that process are lower. However, I can confidently say that every member of staff that goes through it, it takes far too long. The process just takes an absolute age, which adds to stress and ends up with people being on zero pay before they've got to this stage. So in fact, even this morning I was having a conversation with another steward around a person that finds himself in a zero pay situation because of delays in this process. So it does have a financial impact and also can have a psychological impact. So the process takes too long. So any improvements that can be made would be most welcome.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Derek, are you any comments you might have? You don't feel obliged, but anything?
No, Jackie and Michelle have covered a lot of points, but what I would say, echoing something that Michelle said earlier, was that the occupational health area who help report back seem to the ones that take a long time to get back to our HR department, you know, so it kind of echoes Michelle's comment earlier on there.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Derek. I just have one final question then. Do we also have police officers out of pay?
So police officers do have the same provisions around when their pay would be reduced depending on how long they were off sick. However, there is particular case status provided to some cases which, if the ill health retirement process is the reason for the delays in the ill health retirement process is the reason for their pay being reduced, that could be looked at and remedied. And again, I'm sure that would be looked at for staff as well. If a particular case was requested for members of staff, then the retaining on pay would be looked at in the same way.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for us to have a report back on both sets of staff, please, when you're doing the overall end-to-end. Michelle? Is that a legacy hand or a new hand? Legacy? Okay. Right, that's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. So thank you for the update. We look forward to having an end-to-end paper for both sets of staff and continuing to see the progress on this and formal feedback from staff. But Lorna, thank you for that anecdotal feedback that what's happening is making a difference to individual members of staff. So I'm going to now go on to the independent review of the Employment Tribunal and with ACC Spears.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, folks. I'll offer just a couple of introductory comments that supports the paper and the appendix. So the purpose of the paper was just to provide an update in terms of the progress that we have made following the PSNI's review of the Employment Tribunal as outlined within the paper. Going back to the commencement of this, following the Employment Tribunal judgment, PSNI were asked to make some recommendations for us as an organisation around performance, conduct and culture. And the approach that they took back at that time was, in the first instance, to produce an interim report and entirely focus on the conduct of those officers and staff who were participating in the Employment Tribunal. And thereafter, they produced a more substantive report in May of 2022, which focused on 4 kind of key areas, and they made 17 recommendations within the report. So the 4 kind of themes were around Police Scotland's approach to employment tribunals, our handling of grievances within the organisation, the culture within the firearms function of OSD, and then their preventions programme as well. So what we have produced for you today, Chair, is an appendix document which outlines the 17 recommendations that were made by the PSNI. In some instances, you'll see that a number of those recommendations are complete, and there is some text that supports the recommendation. It cuts across a number of business areas within Police Scotland. 1 or 2 of the ongoing recommendations that are still ongoing are that because of the nature of the recommendations, such as culture, where that would probably be a fairly longer journey in terms of us trying to deliver an outcome in that regard. So I wasn't going to draw out any particular recommendations, but maybe just pause there and be happy probably between myself and Nikki Page, given that a number of the recommendations were very, very specific to P&D. if there's any specific questions that you would have. I should just, by way of conclusion, just give you an assurance that right from the outset we put strong governance arrangements in place. So we had a strategic oversight group, we had an action tracker, we've fed some of this reporting in through the Audit and Risk Committee as well, and that oversight group was just to drive forward the commentary that we received from the PSNI.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. Members, any comments or questions you might want to make? Tom?
Thank you. So thanks for the report, Alan, and the team, Nikki. It's really helpful, and I think particularly the strategic oversight group, reading about that and showing this commitment from the top down. I suppose my area I want to explore a bit more is from the bottom up, because we're talking, as you very rightly say, Alan, about the culture. And, you know, the report singles out one area of specialist police and firearms in this elitist type culture. But as everyone knows, there are other specialist areas of operation which would run the risk of falling into that same category. So it's reassurance that this cultural shift is not just in firearms, that it's across all specialist departments. And have we done cultural audits in these other areas? You know, if you think of the group think that you run the risk of if you're working all the time with like-minded enthusiasts for that specialism, it reinforces itself. Just reassurances around that.
Yeah, I think in the first instance, the PSNI report featured a specialist area within Operational Support Division, which was firearms, because that seemed to be the source of some of the challenges around ET. So their focus was entirely in that space. I think what's worked well and what is progressing for us as an organisation is a couple of things. One, around the Policing Together programme, which is we're now well into in terms of the elements of culture that we'd want to address in there. We've obviously got the commencement of an HMI review on culture, and we continue to look at some of the feedback from Your Voice Matters and trying to draw on some of the kind of lived experience from officers and staff across the organisation. So I think we're working on a journey just to focus heavily on culture within the organisation. Tom, I don't think we went and done a bespoke piece of work in another specialist area at this point in time, but I'm confident through the Policing Together programme, Your Voice Matters and HMI work that we will be in a much more informed position from there.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other members got comments or questions? Can I ask that, because it is so nebulous at times, and we know and understand in big organisations, as Tom says, that group think. How are we going to measure progress? How do we know? I mean, I think at some stage we either thought what was happening in there was okay, or we didn't know what was happening in that service. So how are we going to know when we didn't know before?
So I think a couple of comments from myself, and then I'm certain colleagues Nikki or Katie might have a view from a P&D perspective. Obviously, a lot of matters come through our gateway unit. So we're looking at the reports that would come in through professional standards that are very specific in this space. We're probably looking at the number of grievances that would be raised, or the concerns that would come in. We're looking at the feedback that we're getting through Your Voice Matters. So I think in those areas, then we'll be able to draw some degree of analysis as, you know, has our grievances and complaints and allegations against officer staff reducing or staying the same. So I think there'd be some quantifiable measures, Fiona, that would be able to draw on. Would be my first observation. I'm sure Nikki or Katie would want to add to that.
Katie?
Yes, so what I say is set within the context of obviously just a couple of weeks in post. I think there is an opportunity to look at whether you call it a cultural dashboard. I almost think that the terminology we can park, but something then that has the kind of the high level metrics that you would expect to see. So whether that's around kind of performance, leadership, well-being, talent movement, etc. But then the kind of the below the radar optics of your culture, and thinking about, you know, what that looks like for us as an organisation. And there are tools and techniques that you can use to pull something together then that kind of almost talks to all of our portfolios, if I can use that word, but then brings together the totality of the landscape in terms of culture across our organisation. So I personally think that, you know, that's, you know, something that we can look at. You know, Fiona and her team superbly laid out their strategic ambitions and the outcomes. P&D, we obviously need to land on a people strategy and the strategic workforce plan. And then I think that kind of lays the intent then of the organisation, and then we can think about the measurements that would follow for that.
Okay, that sounds really helpful, and I do think it would be good to see that proposal coming forward so that we know what we're going to be measuring and how we'll be able to track that process. Okay, Michelle, Lorna, Derek, anything to comment on, or content to see things going forwards? Lorna?
Thanks, Chair. Just a few small minor points, if I may. In the report on recommendation 8, it mentions that there was specific training recommended for the specific groups, and it just didn't report on that. It was just obviously to see if that had been considered or carried out or obligated.
Okay.
On recommendation 10, it spoke about the professional advice from the legal department, and I know in my previous role we often had delays for things going through legal. It was just to see if there's additional capacity there, or if we're happy that there is, you know, there's going to be resources available if we are encouraging more of our leaders to seek that professional assistance. And also just on the recommendation 15 on the welfare checklist, it was just to see, it may have been one of our AGSs, but to see if the staff associations were involved in input on that welfare checklist. That was all, Chair, thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think your comments, Lorna, are that you're not sure about the training or the welfare checklist, the feedback from the staff side, and also you're thoughtful about the sufficiency of legal advice. So I wonder then, Alan, in terms of, could you say a bit more about the training, whether or not there's the sufficient legal advice and capacity there, and the involvement of the staff associations and trade unions in the work?
Yeah, thanks. So maybe just picking up the training part first, which kind of sits within my portfolio in any case. So the EDI online training package only launched at the tail end of last year, after quite a period of time in pulling that module together. The early feedback or moderate feedback as we navigate our way through that is fairly positive. So I think we would want to see that training concluded. It's mandatory training for everyone across the organisation, and the team are working closely with myself, DCC Taylor, particularly around the PRG, and particularly on the edges of the work that we're doing in support of the public inquiry to develop a more robust EDI training package. So I don't perceive our approach to EDI simply being an online training package, but that's the element that has came first, and we're working towards through that and looking for a more in-depth training input in the coming months. So that's work that's ongoing. The recommendation around legal is just about a preparatory work and the support that officers and staff would have if they're involved in an ET, and we're just working with our legal services. So legislation in Scotland varies a little bit from Ireland when it comes to ETs. So we're just working with our own legal teams about ensuring that within the confines and arrangements for attending an ET, that we are providing adequate support to officers and staff without providing inappropriate support, if that makes sense. So aspects of that will be considered on a case-by-case basis, but we have some structure within legal services, and it allows us to support very specifically preparatory work for ETs and the like. So I think, you know, our experience has been that in more recent times, the numbers of potential ETs is increasing. So that would be my view there. And I think that, sorry, forgive me, the final aspect of that, Chair.
The staff side involvement in the checklist.
Yeah, I maybe just look at Nikki's on the centre of my screen. I don't know if she wants to say something in relation to staff.
Yeah, just in terms of that, actually, Chair, we've got quite an extensive paper on the leadership and the kind of joining up of some of these issues from a preparing our people perspective, because truthfully, we've lacked the provisions to make sure our workforce know how to competently deal with grievance and other things. So we'll get into some of the detail of that in your the leadership update paper. So, but over and above that, and in terms of the kind of wider landscape in this space, we have obviously worked with ACAS in regards to grievance in general. We've checked off our policy, they're comfortable with that. So it is about, very much to go back to your initial point, the culture, the embedding and the training. And those are the things that, as I say, we are putting in place and working to get embedded. And that should, and as Katie's already said, what that should allow us to do then is measure the success of that going forward. So I think we've got all the right pieces in place. It's just drawing them together and then being able to report to give assurances to the committee.
That's great. And the trade union and staff side organisation involvement in that, the creation of that?
Sorry, I thought you were asking the trade union that there. So
sorry, no, Nikki was asking the involvement, and then I'll bring Michelle in.
Yes, so obviously that works in prep at the moment, and Alex's team engages with the trade union as soon as we've got obviously products to discuss with them. In terms of the grievance work, the trade union are on the group that Elizabeth hosts and chairs, so there is engagement round about the SOP and the further developments put in place with trade union and the SPF as well.
That's grand, thanks. Michelle?
Yeah, we are on different forums to kind of influence, but it would be remit of me to say that we don't, you know, believe there's risks for the organisation around this in terms of what Nikki's alluded to there, in terms of training the leadership within Police Scotland. There's significant risks in understanding for employment law, and obviously you're dealing with police officers and dealing with police staff, you're dealing with, you know, two different kind of issues, and we have many an issue in terms of that being understood in the leadership of the organisation. So it's imperative that there's an investment in the leadership matters training.
Okay, that's helpful, Michelle, and we might pick that up later on in the agenda. So I'm going to move us on. Thanks very much for that, ACC Spears. That was really helpful. And in terms of coming back to the next meeting, I don't know if it would be too early in terms of, Katie, you talked about the high-level dashboard, but it would be helpful at some stage, obviously, to continue to see the ongoing progress with times and when we expect all of the actions to be implemented from the independent review, but also the ongoing work. So I'll leave that in terms of noting that we'll need to have a time frame for that and an action plan, or a plan for when we get it. I'm going to move on then to Peter in terms of Q3 workforce report.
Sorry with the delay, a minor clicking issue there, but I'm
Don't
here
worry,
now.
thank you.
Thank you. There's a great deal of data, again, provided for members in the papers, and I wouldn't propose to go through all the data, but what I'll maybe do, or even actually just reread you the briefing paper, but what I'll maybe do is just pick out 3 or 4 points that I think may be of significant interest. Officer numbers, as we see, have increased slightly over the previous quarter, which is encouraging, and in terms of the attrition of officers, we seem to have settled out of the period now on the back of the introduction of the changes to the pension legislation, where we saw a huge number of we saw the attrition increase significantly. So that seems to have bottomed out now, and both the Q3 and it looks like for Q4 we're going to level out to about 220-ish officers. So I'm confident that we're going to see a settling of the officer numbers rather than the huge peaks and troughs that we've experienced really in the last 18 months. So that is encouraging, and I think encouraging for members also. As I say, just turnover, I don't have any concern over staff turnover really at all. It's pretty consistent. However, the officer turnover, just as said there, has settled out. There is a potential when officers can get the full benefit of the changes to the pension regulations in October of the coming year that we may see a peak again. But as it stands just now, there's no indication of that. So as I say, I'm pretty confident that the officer numbers will remain on line with our expectations. In terms of sickness absence, Chair, the sickness absence has increased slightly, but we would expect that over the winter period. And again, it doesn't give me any great deal of concern. What I think I should raise, though, is that the reasons for absence have given me a little bit of concern when I note that miscellaneous was the head reason for one of the sections. And I and my team, along with Susan Beaton's team, have done some work in our own internal systems to try and rectify that position in order that we can better understand the reasons for absence. So that has hopefully been rectified for coming reports, where we're going to reduce the necessity to use the miscellaneous as a reason for absence. Psychological absence, as Susan has discussed earlier, still remains the main reasons alongside respiratory illnesses for our absence. But beyond that, I don't have any real concerns over the absence. We're slightly up in terms of non-COVID absences on years where we didn't have COVID absences, but I think it'll take a time for that to settle out in terms of the difference between what people are considering as respiratory illness with COVID and what's not a respiratory illness. So I think that'll bottom out in the longer term. So I don't have any great deal of concerns over that. Availability, again, we see an increase to the re-rostered rest days, particularly in the senior ranks, brought upon by the Christmas period and the additional holidays that we had, public holidays we had over that period. The numbers have gone up again, but looking at January, I see a significant decrease back down again. I know that my colleagues in resource deployment are looking at this specifically and making an attempt to try and manage these better. But whilst we will always have a balance of re-rostered rest days, I think we should be trying to push that further down, as we indeed are. The toil is less of a concern for me because we have a scheme in place where we buy toil out after 3 months, so I don't have any real great deal of concern over that. I've included a bit of a section here on duty modifications. Whilst the numbers remain around about 1,800 in totality, we better understand what that looks like now since we've done a bit of work round about categorising these. So I think that work has proved to be quite successful in so much as we saw a year-on-year increase over the past 5 years up to about 1,800. From about 5 years ago, we were 900 up to about 1,800. So I'm pleased to say that in the last 12 months, we haven't seen any increase. And I think the work that Kirsty Garrick and her team have done is starting to reap some rewards in that respect. And just finally, in terms of the annual leave carry forward, it is currently sitting about just under 2%. We're working very hard internally to try and push that down because obviously there's a financial implication of taking a carry forward for annual leave. So all commanders and heads of department are encouraging their staff currently to move that forward, and so we've got a carry forward into the annual leave of annual leave into the next year as possible. And thanks, Chair. I'll just stop there, but I'm happy to obviously to answer any questions that yourself or any of your committee members may have.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much for giving us that assurance in terms of the increased stability of the workforce for the moment, at least. Members, any comments or questions? Paul? You're on mute.
Oops. And I've managed to switch my camera off at the
Perfect.
same time.
Okay.
So okay, I beg your pardon. Yes, I've got 3 areas I just wanted to look at. So the first of these was the last one that you raised about time off in lieu and re-rostered rest days and 2.4, the availability. Because the time off in lieu has gone down by 13%, re-rostered rest days have gone up by 15.6. And it's, you know, and the reason for re-rostered rest days going up is public holidays over the holiday period. And I don't understand why one is going down and one is going up. I would have thought if there was more frenetic activity, they would both go up. So I understand you're saying there's a scheme for buying this out, but presumably that scheme was in place a year ago. So I don't know why that's gone down so much. So is there another underlying reason?
Chair, I'll just answer that if I may. No, I don't believe that there is an underlying reason. The reason that toil doesn't go up is because when people have their public holiday re-rostered, when they have a rest day on a public holiday, they get a re-rostered rest day in compensation. So there's a natural increase in re-rostered rest days as a result of that. Toil is generally given as when people have to stay on duty for a number of reasons rather than an organised change to their shift. So, and as I say, that toil continually buys out. So every month we will buy out the previous, a quarter's earlier's toil balance. So there'll be an element of that. But I mean, I could look at it in more detail. I don't have the exact answer for that, but my suspicion is that it's just the ebbs and flows of the way that toil has been granted. But I don't suspect that there's any significant issue in terms of why toil has gone down and re-rostered residues has gone up. But I can certainly look at it if you would like me to.
So how much does that cost us then?
I don't have that to hand, but we're probably paying about 6,000 hours a month in terms of toil buyback rather than leaving it in the bank.
Are we talking millions, tens of millions?
I would be guessing, to be honest. I don't have the financial figures for that, but certainly I can do your report on that for the next meeting.
Or just drop me a line would be helpful. Perhaps maybe something to pick up in the next committee, because I think it's important to have this in public. Because it is, you seem almost, try not to be insulting here, but quite blasé about it. And that's actually quite a lot of cash at a time when there's not an awful lot of cash about. So it's just that. So the second point I wanted to flag up was, I can find it. The average length of service, and this has been in reports before, it's 11.8 years. And I wonder, do we have a target for increasing that? And if not, should we?
Well, there's certainly a concern down south with our colleagues down south about the greening of the service, because they've had the large intake of officers. And I do personally harbour a concern that with the large intakes we have seen over the last year, that we have a reduction in the overall service of the organisation, and that we're managing a lot more younger officers, particularly in territorial divisions. I think the service band, to be honest, is more of a concern rather than the age of the officers. So service gives me more of a concern. And when we look at the graphs, we see that the majority of the younger officers, or officers younger in service, are sitting in local policing. And the majority of the more senior officers are moving into the specialist divisions, which is the nature of policing, because you generally cut your teeth in the local policing arena and then move into the specialist divisions once you're a bit longer in service. But you're absolutely right to raise it. I think there is a concern that with the 300 intakes we've had over the last 12 months, that we've seen probably 400 or 500 more officers than we were experienced in previous years entering the service, and that in turn has created a much younger in service front end to the organisation. So in answer to your question, should we set a target for improving that? I think we always work to replace the number of officers that we lose through natural attrition with an intakes, and that naturally causes a change in the service bands. I don't, unless we change the numbers, I don't know how we would address that. On your point in age, I think the average age is somewhere about 23, 24 as it stands. Just I'm guessing actually, and the data is probably right in front of me. But
I don't think I actually raised the point about age. It was really service level. Because where I'm coming from is, and I'm not meaning, because a lot of the turnover recently in retirals, it's been retirals because of the pension arrangements, and that's perfectly understandable. It's just if we can get that length of service up from what's the average of 12.89 to maybe 14, 15 years. It's the people we're losing along the way in sort of the middle of their careers that I wonder if there's more we can do to try and keep them for that little bit longer, maybe not necessarily in perpetuity, but that bit longer, because obviously we're investing in training them. It's a particular vocation, so it's not like they can easily be replaced, and certainly not people with that. And there's a loss of, for want of a better description, corporate memory and corporate experience. And that would be for us, but I mean, obviously there's a professional experience there as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The largest proportion of officers we lose beyond those who retire at full services in the first 10 years. So I know there is pieces of work doing, looking at improving both our exit interviews and our retention interviews. So we're looking at a piece of work round about that just now with my P&D colleagues. Whilst I'm not leading on it, I'm certainly going to be very much involved in taking that forward. But I think you make a very good point there. Thank you.
And the last one I've got is regarding time off and leave balance in business areas. And there's a reference to balance in E division where officers currently appear to owe back 486.4 hours, which is an increase of 277 from the previous quarter. How can that happen? But you're muted.
I beg your pardon. There was a policy brought into place some years ago which allowed a small amount of toil to be granted to officers to allow them to owe us. And two divisions, E division and J division, seem to use that much more than other divisions. Right. We're currently investigating why that is the case. Our people partners are working with the divisions to understand that. To be perfectly honest, we're not fully understanding why that position is as it currently is.
And forgive my ignorance, but where is E division?
That's the Edinburgh City division.
Oh, right, yeah. I should know that. That's me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Any other comments from members or questions? Tom?
Thank you, Peter. It's the report around modified duties. We've got a number of officers and staff actually, but so 26-28% going past the review dates. Now, given the number of officers and staff who in modified duties persist in more than 2 years, and the review, particularly where it's restricted duties, that review is crucial. So are those that are missing the review dates are the groups that are probably less an issue for us around postnatal, etc. There's very much is about support in those areas of risk to us, that they're not missing review dates. Does that make sense, what I've said?
Yeah, no, it absolutely doesn't. And I wish I could say that yes is the answer to that. It does give us concern as well. And at the recent meeting of our P&D performance group, this was raised, and the people partners are going to pick it up again. We seem to fluctuate somewhere between 12% and 25% in terms of missed dates for the reviews. And I think we just need to implement a kind of a stronger approach to that in order that these review dates aren't missed. I don't know, Nick, I see Nikki's maybe wanting to say something in regards to that.
So all I was going to say, Tom, is that we've round about in a 6-month period got 1,800 people coming through that system and hitting various junctures. So what we're discovering is that as much as we are putting a significant amount of time and effort into getting line managers up to speed, supporting them to get these reviews done, what we're finding is there is as many people going into the review stage. So it's a constant activity that we have to keep pushing the business to do. The good thing is, and we'll cover this in Alex's paper, is that we have that people management course coming up that will be focused on sergeants, and this is one of the issues that we'll be covering in detail and training our people to do, so as that they are experienced and they have the skills to know and prepare for these things coming up without as much prompting as is currently taking us through the people partners at a divisional level. So what we anticipate is where we'll support them to do that and prompt them at the moment and report that so that they keep ahead of that considerable volume. We'll equally train them so as that there's less prompting necessary. So we would hope those two things will come together and that will impact that proactive look rather than the reactive where we have to report that they're behind. So hopefully that gives you some assurance.
I suppose, Chair, having heard the responses, which I'm grateful for, I'd like a wee bit more. I'd welcome more analysis of those cases that are not being reviewed, so we understand what it is we're missing. I'd also like some analysis, some deeper analysis of those modified duties that are over 2 and certainly over 5 years, so we understand that. And I think there's the process side of it, which we're talking about here, and there's the risk to the organisation. So some narrative against that analysis from professional standards would also be welcome. So I think it's it's not just a people answer I'm looking for in order that we understand just what this means, but it's an area we need more information on. You're on mute, Chair.
I think that'll be helpful, Tom. Thank you. And we can decide whether or not that's just coming back straight forward to the committee, or whether we're needing a deeper dive on it so that we can better understand what's happening. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Can I ask about the balance of gender, please, in the workforce? Yes. So I think last time, we had an increase reported, and when I asked what that was in headcount, it was one person, one additional female. So I'm wondering whether or not what we're seeing statistically, although any increase is welcome in terms of balance both ways, in terms of police staff and warranted officers, how much of that is natural variation and how much of that is actual increase that will be sustained and taken over time?
Thanks for the question, Chair. I did have a look over time, just in case that you asked that, and I'll check back 5 years to 2018. So we've increased the number of female officers percentage terms by 3% in 5 years. So we were around about 30% in 2018, and we're somewhere 33 plus a little bit as it stands. In terms of female officers in rank, we were at 24% or slightly over 24% in 2018, and we're now at 29%. So we have seen a significant increase in female representation over the past 5 years. There will just be small variations month on month. I would suspect that we tend to be seeing, and when I did some analysis of the figures in preparation for this meeting, there was very little change, to be honest. I think the number of per head, the female officers went up by less than 10 and the males by less than 30, but overall the whole number came down, so it all kind of cancelled each other out. So but in the longer term, and I think maybe when I'm reporting in future we should look at a longer piece or a longer time scale, because I think the very short time scales isn't necessarily giving you the picture that the committee would want.
No, I think that would be really helpful, Peter. And I couldn't find, before I bring Katie in, I couldn't find or easily find the percentage of part-time staff across the grades, which I think would also be interesting. And I know I've seen it before. Katie.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think what we'll do is we'll take a little bit of a step back in terms of the reporting that we currently provide, and take the opportunity, if we can, to think about what that looks like going forward, so that we end up with a kind of if I can call it, an operational dashboard that talks to key workforce metrics and costs, etc., but then also some strategically aligned measures as well, so that has not only the kind of the past or the current narrative, but perhaps predictive as well about the kind of the future trends, and then perhaps more importantly, how we tie that to the actions and that we're specifically going to take on the back of the insight that we can see. So we'll commit to doing that and try and bring something back for further discussion as soon as we're able.
So I think that would be really, really helpful. And I think that look forwards as well. So in terms of where we to continue to see that increase, when would we get to a balance? So I think that would be helpful. Colleagues, Federation or trade unions, Michelle? And then Lorna.
It was just on your last point, Chair. I'm actually coming in terms of the statistics that's there around gender breakdown and profile. I think I've asked this of Peter before. It's obviously we represent mostly females in the staff side, but there's never ever shown that I can see a breakdown in terms of the grading for staff. So although staff is predominantly so I think it's 63% female, but we're not seeing where that is in terms of the grades, because I think mostly in the higher graded profile for staff, it's actually males that are represented in there. So there's obviously you know, work that the organisation can do that would be positive in that respect. So it would be good to have all of that data shown.
That's helpful. Thanks very much, Michelle. Lorna?
Thanks, Chair. It was just a point to raise on the retirements, and obviously the remedy is due to be legislatively enforced by October this year. And do we foresee then that there could be officers who are waiting in the wings for that to come into force, and then see another, albeit smaller, surge at that point?
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Lorna. So I think, Peter, Katie, it would be helpful to have that, because I don't want to have the gender inequality by grades. So I think it would be helpful to see that broken down. Like also full and part-time would be helpful across staff and also warranted officers. And Lorna, I think your warning about we may well see a peak, I think Peter alluded to. So it will be helpful to get a sense of where that's going. And we should begin to know, I'm assuming, Peter, over the summer about notification of intention to retire?
28 days is the statutory requirement, but we usually find out about 3 months in advance. So yes, during the summer, Chair.
Okay, that's grand. Okay, I'm going to move on. Tom, over to you in terms of the Workforce Development and Improvement Plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, this paper follows nicely from the discussion that's just taken place. The appetite for better data, better dashboards, better insights and analysis is one that's shared within Police Scotland, as well as we know by yourselves. And I think there's a number of helpful prompts that have just been made around the kind of data that you expect to see. Equally, the action log, just referring back to that, actions 1 and 4, make the points about sickness, absence and overtime data. I wanted to give you some assurance, as I had touched on when we last met, that a review is underway. There are multiple dashboards and lots of different data sets, but what I had asked was undertaken, and what's been underway is a look at data utility, data availability, what scope there is for automation, and actually the intention is to support Katie in what Katie has articulated around the development of dashboards, whether it be around culture, around operations, and essentially to take on board the second area for development that HMI had recommended within their strategic workforce plan report that we'll come on to speak about shortly, which was about improving our approach to workforce data and MI. So over the months since the committee last met, myself and Peter have had a number of conversations with NPCC colleagues. We've reached out to the Home Office. We're looking at best practice from elsewhere. There's also been a landscape review undertaken that's annexed to the paper itself, just to set out what the different data sets are that we have, and they are sourced from different systems, which is something that needs to be taken some account of, but there's certainly a willingness to get over any hurdles that there might be around that, not least from PSD colleagues, and we've heard from ACC Spears in that context. So there are specific timescales within this paper, and the commitments that we had made were that we would have better reporting in line with your expectations by the time the Q1 report comes back in, and that's the August meeting of this committee. But that's not to simply kick the can further down the road. We intend and are already engaged with your officer colleagues, and basically as the strategic workforce planning team transfers back across to P&D, now that Katie's in place and is able to take that work forward, myself and the analysts will continue to support Peter and others but essentially we wanted to make some commitments and give you some assurance that the work is underway and we're ready to develop that to the point where you have fit for purpose reporting for the next reporting year. So I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Halpin, I think Fiona has dropped off, so would you mind taking over? And I'll try and contact her. Oh no, there's Fiona there.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
All right,
I thought everything was that easy. Tom, that's really, really helpful. I think incredibly promising in that we'll get the improved data. You obviously heard the conversation that we've had in terms of what would be helpful from an assurance point of view. So thank you for that. Comments or questions from members? No, fairly comprehensive and succinct, so that's thank you. Comments from trade union or staff side? Content? Look forward then to seeing the further iteration of that. So that's going to be really helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So we're staying with you, Tom, in terms of the HMICS improvement plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the HMICS assurance review that was published in August of last year around the approach that was taken to the development of the first strategic workforce plan. We've had really good engagement with your own SPA officers, Chris Brown and Darren Patterson, been a great help. Also good engagement with HMI, and I know Tina Yule is on this call. Essentially, we have focused on the development of the improvement plan to learn the lessons from that first SWP and its development. We are conscious with the financial context we find ourselves in that the need to get this right and do it appropriately and come to some clear conclusions around actions relating to the development of the workforce is absolutely pressing. So that's the commitment again. Myself and Katie have had a few discussions about how we can step this forward. There might be scope to accelerate, but Katie will say something about that at the next agenda item. But essentially, we wanted to, again, give you visibility and some assurance that we have taken on board all of the recommendations within the HMI report. Not all of them relate directly to areas of responsibility that sit with P&D or with my own team. They sit elsewhere within the organisation around areas like design, for example. But there is an organisation-wide commitment that we're going to drive this forward and do things appropriately and take proper account of the advice and the observations that we were given by HMI in what was a really helpful report. So I'll stop at that point, but very happy to answer any questions. Thank you. That's
great. Thanks very much indeed. And I think obviously helpful to note that all of the recommendations accepted, and albeit they sit in a number of departments, will get a comprehensive response to that, which will be helpful. Thank you. Comments or questions from members? No, we're content. Or Tom?
Yeah, that's really encouraging, Tom, about how it's being developed. I suppose thinking about how do you shape the workforce going forward and where it is, etc., is absolutely critical that divisional commanders as well as executive own what that workforce looks like. And then the papers just now, I'm not saying they haven't been involved. I'm certain they have been, but it would be good to hear just exactly how explicitly they are involved in shaping that plan going forward, inputs, because if places to be shaped locally as well as strategically, that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Chair, I'm happy to come back in if that's okay.
Of course it is, of course.
Yeah, great, thank you. So Katie will come on to speak briefly about the development process for the next SWP. I think one of the key bits of learning and one of the key observations from the HMI report was that we adopted an approach which left much of the responsibility with the local commanders to just define what it was that they needed locally. And I think what we can change and what we've got the opportunity to address is having a better, higher level view. There's the long-term strategy. There's the workforce strategic assessment, which we'll come on to speak about. Here's our understanding of the data. And then the SWP becomes a much higher level but focused action plan that you can hold us to account for. That will, by its nature as well, involve engagement with local commanders to make sure we take proper account of what they need. But what we want to avoid is that it's really the SWP becomes a very large amalgam of lots of different localised asks. So I'll just give you that assurance.
Okay, Tom, are you content? The proof of the pudding will be in. You're looking for that balance, aren't you? Yeah, yeah. Because obviously, if things are going to morph locally, then we need to have a confidence that the local commanders are content and confident about the shape of their workforce. David?
Thanks, Chair. Just kind of building on what Tom McMahon said, and in response to Tom Halpin, the last SWP was actually too dependent on what local divisional commanders were doing, because we didn't provide them with the context that they needed, which is why you'll remember the last SWP basically came out with an ask for overall, we need another 350 people and millions of pounds extra for policing. So it's always been the intent this time round, not only to always get that local divisional input, but also to get much more of a strategic top-down into it, to provide context, and also, which we didn't have last time, principally because it's been developing, is a much more evidence-led and fact-based SWP, and that's obviously coming through Tom McMahon and the DPU team. So it's going to be very much an amalgamation of divisional commander input in terms of using their experience and what's happening on the ground, strategic direction from on high, demand evidence coming in, and the other thing that we'll be looking for quite hard in the strategic workforce plan, where we didn't really kind of get into this as hard as we needed to last time, is workforce mix, ensuring that it's right people with the right job, with the right tools. So this is really around the police officer and the civilian. There's still quite a lot of jobs in policing which are done by police officers that should really be done by civilian staff, because to be quite frank, we'll get better continuity. So that's the approach we're taking, and obviously delighted with Katie coming on board, who's got experience in this space, and we're looking at taking all of these things into the mix this time round and driving it at a harder pace. So I think the board will be pleased. I definitely am with the direction of travel now. Thank you. Okay. And obviously operating within a financial envelope, which is absolutely critical at the moment, because that we would have done that anyway. It's even more difficult now because we've got some very challenging circumstances budgetary wise.
No, exactly. And I think for me the attention on workforce well-being is incredibly important as well, so that we individual members of staff have a workload that creates an environment for them to do their job well and to flourish, rather than just piling additional work onto people. So I think that whole balance is going to be important. So thanks for that. If I don't see any others wanting to come in, I'm going to move on to Katie. You're going to give us a verbal update now.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we're obviously taking this opportunity at the moment, working with Tom and Kirsty and others, to look at the development of the people strategy, so the next chapter of people strategy for the organisation, and the key strategic themes that will flow from that. But in addition, working with colleagues to think about how we can try and pull forward the timeline for the strategic workforce plan. So the next plan is not due until April 2024. But what we would like to try and do is to bring that forward such that for committee, we land both the people strategy and the strategic workforce plan together. So you look at strategic intent and commitments, and then about how we think that we shape, develop, etc., the workforce and readiness to deliver that. So the two are considered together. I think on the strategic workforce plan, what I would like to do with Tom is a working workshop with committee So we kind of roll our sleeves up and look at what the product is and what the product isn't, so that as we move forward with the development of that, we're all very clear, I guess, on what some of the parameters are. We absolutely will include other stakeholders in that, so the Police Federation, trade unions, and kind of broader thinking. And the purpose for that, I think, is to what David was just talking about there, that before we kind of launch ourselves into development, we're all clear on what that looks like and what it is that we're working for. So the intent is to try and bring that forward to this summer. And I guess the ask of committee in doing that is to recognise that the product, in my mind, might be 80-20. But what we do is we set forward with the intent, with very clear actions and outcomes on the strategic workforce plan, but that it becomes an iterative process then of reviewing that in light of changes within the workforce. So whether that's changes in demographics, external changes, budgetary changes, etc., so that it becomes a living document and not just a fixed strategy for 2 to 3 years. So I think that's all I was intending to say on that, if that's okay, Chair.
Of course, that's really helpful, and I'm pleased that you're given the importance of workforce. I think it's going to be very powerful to bring the strategic workforce plan forwards. I think to be able to see that, particularly given where we're sitting financially, but also our current workforce numbers, so that we can get a sense of making sure we get the right people in post, and that it sits almost as a companion piece with the people strategy. So that's really encouraging. Thank you so much. And I think that, I can't remember now what you said, the working people committee is going to be very helpful. Thank you. Comments or questions from members? Okay, and staff side, trade unions, obviously, you've got Katie's commitment to work in partnership with you, and obviously in principle of the terms of the Fair Work, that would be only expected. So that's great. Thank you very much for that update. Tom, you have bringing a paper on the People Strategy Development Plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very briefly, and obviously Katie's update brings right up to date much of the discussion on this. But when we last met, when you last met as a committee, we had discussed that sense that the people strategies should set direction right across a whole number of workforce related themes. So it's to give you some assurance that we're taking proper account of that. Katie's just given you the update on current internal thinking about how quickly we might work to develop the people strategy, and obviously engagement around that. And really just to set out what we expect will be the component parts of this product that we want to land this summer, and we'll continue to engage with you, both members and obviously your staff members and colleagues. So I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much indeed. Members, any comments or questions? Staff side colleagues, anything? Michelle?
The only comment I would make here would be around what you've already actually alluded to in the last verbal update, is around the underpinning of the work with the Fair Work programme, and that's key here. That would be the only comment from myself. Thanks.
No, I think that's helpful. Tom, in terms of your paper, you're presenting it for information rather than agreement and approval. Am I right?
Yes, it was purely to give you an update on work that we'll do with yourselves.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to go over to you, Nikki, in terms of the P&D activity.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the update on the P&D activities against the strategic plans. So, Chair, there's already been dialogue in regards to the people strategy, and this paper is a means of ensuring that the site of activities in the period between the last strategy and the new one. And obviously, as has been discussed going forward, we'd have the strategy and outcomes against that, which in my view would more align with what members are looking for. But that aside, in this gap, what this paper is to do is to bring together all the activities into one place and give an oversight to members of that activity against some of the wider strategic outcomes from, for example, the APP, etc. So the papers there's a number of highlights in the paper that are already in separate papers within the agenda, so I'm not going to draw any of them out because we've had discussion on them. I suppose what I would draw out, because it came out at last committee, is that there has been a further meeting with ACC Bond in regards to the Your Voice Matter progress, so we'll be in a good place to pull that activity against the other 16 recommendations together and report that at a future committee. So that is progress even from writing this report. Separate to that, obviously, there's a number of HMICS recommendations, etc., all incorporated in progress against all of those. Hybrid working is also mentioned in this report, which is something that obviously members have had an interest in the past. And just to highlight that that's embedded in terms of the guidance, but there's ongoing work in Dalmarnock to reshape the floor there, to look at how that might impact our future ambition in regards to our estate strategy, and that work will underpin and help us to do lessons learned for the future as well. So a variety of different, quite disparate and wide-ranging updates in that one paper, Chair, but happy to take any questions or queries members might have against any of the subjects that are raised.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Nikki. And as you rightly say, some of this has been, we've seen the evidence of that peppered around, across this afternoon. Absolutely. And also, as you say, as even between the paper being written, the progress, which is helpful. Comments or questions from members? No, satisfied with the update. Derek, Michelle, Lorna? Content? Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you so much. We're now going to move on. So we've noted that paper. We're now going to move on over to you, James, in terms of the health and safety report.
Thanks very much, Chair. Happy to take the paper as read. Just a few comments I'd like to highlight to members, and I'll be as brief as I can. So looking at the dashboard first, we continue the theme of no enforcement action in any aspect of health and safety or fire safety. We have had some meetings with the HSE in relation to Legionella, and I'll focus on Legionella at the end of my report. The dashboard also shows the 21% decrease in manual handling accidents, which is very positive, and it shows a very slight increase in reporting around slips, trips and falls and assaults, but fairly small increase. The headline RIDDOR figure for the year was reported in this paper at 148, as compared to total year pre-pandemic of 182. At the moment, a more up-to-date figure is 166. My kind of feeling is we'll probably end up with the same number as we had pre-pandemic, but it's still a very, very small number for an organisation of our size. Page 3 highlights the health and safety policy for both SPA and Police Scotland has now been completely reviewed. It's been approved at the Health and Safety Board, and in due course will be brought to this committee for further approval. Turning to page 4, I'd like to highlight all this year's assurance model audits have been completed for the year. These include E Division, L Division, N Division and Road Policing. We're in the process of reissuing the assurance model for 23-24, and we've been really impressed by the standard that we've seen this year within divisions. Page 5 shows the progress in terms of custody and productions audits. And while we've almost completed all the audits, as Health and Safety Manager, I took the decision end of last year to slow down the pace of them slightly to allow for more formal inspections of police offices again. These visits have found a number of issues brought on by a lack of funding for our estate, and we're working closely with estate's colleagues to prioritise these actions going forward, and progress will be reported through the Health and Safety Board. Brian Johnson is here with me today from Estates to answer any questions that you may have in relation to progress on actions from Estates. And similarly, in terms of fire safety, progress is shown on page 6. And again, Brian will be able to answer any questions in relation to those actions. One matter I would wish to highlight is some concerns that I had in relation to the calibration of our VESDA fire detection system in certain locations. And Estates colleagues have brought in subject matter experts to carry out some tests for me. To be clear, early indications are that the system is fully compliant with standards, but we do set a very high bar in terms of what we look for during our audits. So we'll continue with our checks and provide an update in due course. In terms of accident figures, I think the only thing I'd like to draw out is that we're still seeing a very slight rise in injuries during arrest. And as part of the Your Safety Matters work, we've identified the transportation element of the custody process as an area where issues have arisen recently. It's an area we've carried out a lot of work in the past, and I'm going to be taking a look at, or a fresh look at this area, not particularly because we think there's a problem, but just to fulfil good practice. We have changed the make of some of the vehicles we've used, although it still is the same caged cell area in the back of of vans, etc. Happy to report back on that in due course. Finally, I want to come back to the issues around Legionella at Tullyallen, and in a moment I'll pass over to the DCO for more detailed comment. Proactive checks carried out by the estates team at the end of last year showed a positive indication of Legionella within the water supply at the college. I would have to say that this is not uncommon generally across all organisations, and it's exactly why we carry out testing under our water safety risk assessment process. What was perhaps unusual was the number of positive results and the scale of work required to flush out the water system and ensure that it was fit for purpose. And that resulted in both headquarters and Tullyallen closing, with headquarters moving to Stirling Police Office and probationer training moving to Stirling University. The site was closed over the festive period to allow this work to take place, and we have subsequently had a visit from the HSE, who are content with the paperwork and control measures in place. And my understanding is that they'll come back for a further visit this summer to ensure that the estate's work is still going to plan. Chair, with your permission, I'd probably like to pass across to DCO at this point, as estate sits within his portfolio.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, James. As James said, we had a health and safety visit into Tullyallen, where they reviewed the work that had been done. We got an all clear on that. No enforcement notices. I mean, there was a huge amount of work done by the estates team and by James and his health and safety colleagues, and they're going to come back in 6 months to review progress on it. Part of the issue of why it took us so long to kind of fix the problems there was because we had waterworks going back 30 odd years in some of the buildings which had never been updated on schematics. We were finding when you find Legionella bacteria, and I'd like board members, to note that we found the Legionella bacteria as part of our normal water risk safety testing that we do. So we identified the problem. We then kind of localize it, go in, clean it, flush it, and disinfect it. But as James said, then you get repeat findings. If you get repeat findings, it usually means because there's dead legs in the system somewhere, which is usually, again, most people will know what a dead leg is, but effectively, if a room was used as a shower room or something in the past, and then you change the use of the room, if they cut the pipes off, change the use of the room, but leave the pipe legs hanging off, that's where water can accumulate. So we did a search for dead legs. We found about a dozen, but then we found more and more. Eventually, we found over 160, and some of them we were finding because we had one of the caretakers who works on the site has been there 30 plus years, and he remembered that was one room that was completely tiled, had been used as a shower room about 25 years ago. So they broke through the tiles and ripped the wall down and found pipes underneath it. So it's that type of thing, and effectively what that is a long-term lack of investment in the estate, which keeps everything up to date. So we're doing a kind of belt and braces fix of all the things that have been reported in Tullyallen. Because of what we found in Tullyallen, I commissioned Assets, who are our internal auditor, to carry out a management report for me, because what we wanted to understand was, were there any lessons from what we discovered at the at Tullyallen site, the college and the force headquarters, that would be replicated across the broader Police Scotland estate. They completed that. The report effectively tells us that, as we suspected, when we kind of looked into Tullyallen, we're conducting water risk safety treatments and water risk safety testing in line with what we should be doing. Where there's been a failure is across keeping documentation up to date. What we should have is readily available documentation with a clear audit trail, being held for 5 years in accordance with the L8 requirements that says effectively you can demonstrate that you've had water risk safety testing done on a regular basis. Where risk is identified, you've taken appropriate action, you've got the documentation to evidence it, and you hold that record for 5 years. The paper trails were absent in many places, and what we had to do was basically, as opposed to going into show me like an audit trail or a spreadsheet showing all the works, we were able to go back into finding the quotes for the work and the receipts and stuff like that, which is obviously very time consuming. So what we're doing as a result of the poor kind of paperwork trail there is we're going to carry out a water risk Legionella bacteria assessment of every single one of the Police Scotland sites, just to establish a new baseline across Police Scotland. And then separate to that, what we're doing is a review of all of the documentation and audit paper controls and management controls across the site. That will bring us up to speed. We've established a gold group, which I co-chair with DCC Taylor, to both manage the findings of Legionella bacteria and what it's told us about paperwork and documentation. That gold group consists of Federation Health and Safety representatives, ASPs. It consists of Unison and Unite Health and Safety representatives. So they've been fully cited on what's occurred, the management reports, and the action that we're planning. In fact, we held the last Estates Gold meeting yesterday, and everyone's content with the direction of travel. And then the second thing we're going to be doing is I'm going to commission a separate management report to do a review of all health and safety regulatory requirements in terms of what we found on the water risk safety assessments was that the documents weren't in the order that they needed to be. So we're going to check everything else just to make sure that's all in appropriate order. And I'll expect that piece of work to be done over the next 10 or 12 weeks. So there's a very comprehensive piece of work to try and bring the standards of paperwork and documentation up to speed. Health and Safety went out and visited a couple of police stations, Baird Street and Paisley, to check their water risk testing assessments. They both got a clean bill of health, which is why the Estates Gold Group, health and safety colleagues, both Police Scotland and Staff Associations, are content that any risk is appropriately managed. It's the documentation trail where we've let ourselves down. So I just wanted to kind of build on the piece of work that's been going on behind the scenes. As James said, everyone's been working very closely together, but happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, David. So, members, comments or questions? No, I've got three, probably in reverse order because they'll be easiest to answer that way. The dangerous dog bites. I'm interested if that's something that is not routine. Is that for every police officer, never knowing when you're going to see a dangerous dog or when called? So I'm just thinking about the additional suit that would have to be worn. I'm interested in the increasing number of assaults being attributed to the increase in reporting. At some stage, that needs to level out in terms of when do we think we've got that fully comprehensive reporting. And then I'd quite like a bit more information about the Legionella in particular. We picked it up on our routine testing. I'd like to know when the last test was and was that clear of Legionella?
Chair, I can answer the first two if that's okay, and then I'll pass to either Brian or DCO Page, if that's all right. So dangerous dogs come up from time to time. We have seen a number of incidents recently where officers have sustained bites, and some of those have been quite nasty. So the suits that we talk about just one option. With a number of options being looked at, there'll be a paper going to the next Health and Safety Board to flush this out a little bit more. But we clearly need to do something. So we are being quite proactive there. And we're also looking at other agencies who may have training to deal with such a situation. It's not always easy for police officers to get involved. So there's no real pattern or trend. It's just we have noticed that there's been a few incidents, so we're being proactive. The second question, sorry, Chair, forgive me, the second question was?
The increase in assaults. There's a slight
Yes.
increase in assaults, but
Yes.
the sense is that's about encouraging people to report.
Yes. So I think my professional judgment would tell me towards the end of this year, actually. Health and safety stats are a bit of a slow burn. It's very hard to look at trends in a matter of weeks or months. I think we have to let it run through the summer, and by the end of this year, we'll have a real feel for where that's going. The one that interests me more particularly at the moment is the increase in injuries during arrest. It's just a slight increase, but we want to nip that in the bud and understand why that's happening. Is it something within custody? Is it something within the transport element? At the moment, our figures are telling us it's to do with transport. Why is that? And what's the behavioural science behind that? And we'll try and understand that. And I'll certainly feed back to you.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And the Legionella in terms of, when was our last test? What was it? But also what preventative measures, because we knew there were dead legs. So what was the flushing regime that was in place to try and prevent the?
I think that's a question for Brian Johnson, if Brian's able to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. The last test we carried out was in November. That's where we identified it. Prior to that, it was under the Mighty contract, which obviously was in August 2021. In the previous year, under the Mighty, there had been 1 or 2 positive results in the various buildings, which were ultimately addressed as local isolations. Obviously, you can identify a single room, find that to be positive, and that is locally disinfected. You don't need to do the whole system. So we've done all those. Obviously, we've now changed the regime under the new, going forward from the lessons learned, Chair. We're actually going to do 6 monthly checks in Tullyallen based on what we've got. And that's what we're going to do, what we call a near, far and midpoint. And we will do this on each level in each building. Now, in the past, there was a near, far and midpoint in a building. So you would have only 3 results across 3 or 4 floors. We're now just leveling this out to make sure we cover each floor, and that's now being done. The flushing regime is in place and has always been in place for little used outlets. Part of our control measures is to do flushing and temperature checks. Temperature checks are carried out monthly and recorded, and any variations above or below the temperature for the hot and cold are addressed as a work order, and they have been getting done. Obviously, last year was a particularly hot summer, so we did see some of the cold water temperatures rise, and they were addressed. The only way we can address that is to flush the water, to actually pull more water through it so it dilutes it from that side. Going forward, at this moment in time, we actually have a complete flushing regime in, because we have as part of the L8 requirement, we are testing every building that was positive every 2 weeks for a period of 3 months to get clear results. This is in line with ACOP, and we have all agreed to this, and we've now started that process, and we'll keep abreast of the results with the team going forward.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions from members? Can I ask about the backlog maintenance and the condition then of the estate, and how confident are we that the buildings are from a health and safety point of view, if we're looking at, say, the fire systems or whatever, that there's a sufficient investment in terms of keeping our buildings as at a minimum safe?
Yeah, so I mean, we had a condition survey. You have to do condition surveys every 5 years, and we did a condition survey in, I think it was 2021, obviously right in the middle of COVID, so it got delayed a little bit. That condition survey highlighted the fact that there was about, again, I can write to the committee, but it was something like £270 million worth of investment required over a period of time to bring the Police Scotland overall estate up to the required standard. That didn't come as a surprise because of the condition survey that had been done before that in 2012-13, I think it was, had said we needed about £300 million worth of improvements, investment in the estate to bring it up to the appropriate condition. The reduction in the overall magnitude of the condition survey wasn't so much because of any huge investment we'd made in the estate. It reflected the fact that we've actually been selling off a lot of the estate over a good number of years, so the problem has become slightly smaller. In terms of investment into the estate, again, we've said at board a couple of times, and I actually said it at the board on Thursday, and we've said it at the Parliament. The Chief Constable and Force Executive are 100% committed to ensuring that there's any health and safety requirement in the estate is appropriately funded immediately. One of the key questions that we asked ASITs to review when they did the water risk safety assessment, which they've done in the last 5-6 weeks, was if there was any requests for health and safety investment that weren't made. And ASITs came back with a categoric, every time a health and safety compliance issues raised, investments made are readily available. So I'm comfortable that confident that we do deliver that. One of the issues we do have about the condition of the estate, however, is because of the budget pressures on non-pay currently, with rates, electricity, gas, and all the other kind of pressures that everyone's acutely aware of. It does mean that this year, as of about 3-4 months ago, actually probably going into the summer last year, we've had to cut our maintenance bill, our maintenance activity to just P1 and P2 events, which effectively mean if it's a health and safety breach or a security issue, then we'll fix it. All of the maintenance requests that come in for P3 and P4, which tend to be more towards the kind of the aesthetics of an environment, the well-being of an environment, we can't afford to do those. And currently, although obviously we've not laid the budget yet, going into next year, we're going to be P1s and P2s. That's all we can do. And we are going to be commissioning a separate report just to double check to make sure all the standards are applicable. So currently, I have no concerns that we're not health and safety compliant in terms of our estate. We've got a really good health and safety team internally that are very proactive and identifying issues and calling them out. And we do make monies available over and above anything that's required to address any shortfalls in health and safety. So hopefully, Chair, that provides a little bit of comfort to the board.
That's helpful. Thanks, David. Paul?
Yes, sorry, just coming back to the Legionella issue, and apologies, I should have asked this before, but just, Brian, how often does the routine testing take place?
It's actually been getting carried out annually. That's like there's just for that, if I may, there is no legal requirement to do testing. The requirement is to have the controls in place. We put testing as a good high priority, as an indicator of our controls. And that's why we've actually got it. Going forward over the next, until Ellen, we will do it every 6 months. And once we've got a good clean bill of health where we've got every building rechecked, we will then move back to an annual basis once we've actually got the results, and that will be based on evidence. If we don't have the evidence to sustain that we're in a good place, we will continue to do it 6 monthly.
And it was just in the shower areas?
No, we had it in taps, we had it in showers.
Right.
It was various. It just seems to be.
How was disinfecting taking place? Was it just sodium hypochlorite mopped all over the place, or?
No, the system is actually opened up. The cold water tanks are filled with sodium hypochlorite.
Yeah.
And then it is pulled out towards the tap. It is left for 1 hour to actually allow it to be active, and then the system is flushed. I think it's sodium metasulfate added to neutralize the chlorine, and then fully flushed. And then you resample You must do resamples after a flushing exercise, and then you actually wait the 14 days to then do that. On one of the buildings, we had to use chlorine dioxide because we believe we had a bacteria film, a biofilm, and it's a much stronger form of chlorination. It's left in the system for roughly the same time, same process, resampled, and that eradicated a large number in that building. We still had one or two, and we identified that to be a pipework behind the wall that was just invisible to us until we actually dug it out.
Yeah, and my last question is, I'm assuming nobody actually caught Legionella.
No, but nobody contracted Legionella disease. Absolutely not.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks.
Yeah, the Legionella bacteria that was found was pure routine testing that we do on a regular basis.
Thank you. Tom?
Thanks, Chair. It's no surprise that I've already expressed my concern about the inability to put budget into estates beyond P1, P2, so I accept that point's been made. Albeit it's been made again today. My question, David, is you said that this position's been in the place since the summer, and certainly is the position's likely to be through the next financial year. Do you see that as a temporary or returning back to investing in maintenance estate in terms of aesthetics, etc., beyond next year? Is it 1 year pain to get it right, get us through this position, or is this going to sustain?
It's not a 1 year problem. This is continuous. The amount of money that we're able to allocate to the police estate every single year is less than we need to appropriately bring our estate up to the condition that we would want it to be in terms of public sector buildings. Where we've got to now is looking at the size of the estate to literally change the estate size to fit the budget available and to fit the operational need. So we are actively looking at the moment and reviewing all police buildings with our operational colleagues to see where we can concentrate in police buildings and then effectively sell off the ones that we don't need for a couple of reasons. A, general condition, we just cannot maintain an estate the size we've got with the funding profiles we've been given over the years. And then secondly, because of the operational footprint will probably change as a result of the funding settlement this year, then the actual operational requirements are changing as well. So we're never going to have enough money to kind of look after the estate the size we've got on current trends. So we're going to have to look at reducing the estate to fit the money effectively.
But so I accept it will never have enough money. But the question is, with zero money going into these other categories, is that produce a likelihood of increasing circumstances that involve P1 and P2s? So we're going to exacerbate 100%. The problem.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, because it's the same with anything. If you've got an issue where you've got, a bit of a leak in a corner of a roof, a kind of minor problem, if you don't fundamentally address it and you keep putting kind of, as I've said, band-aids on it, eventually you end up losing the roof, and it costs you an awful lot more to fix a problem rather than a proper maintenance system. And unfortunately, what we're having to do is direct our maintenance into regulatory compliance as opposed to preventative compliance. And the preventative compliance means that, and again, board members will have seen this, there's plenty of photographs that come up over the years of things that look shabby. They really do not lend themselves to the well-being of officers and staff who live in these buildings and operate in these buildings. We just can't afford, unfortunately, to bring them up to the standards that we would aspire to do.
Well, first of all, thank you for being candid, but in terms of the relevance to this committee, it will obviously be subject to conversations in Resources Committee and elsewhere, but in this committee and police people, the point you made in the detrimental impact on welfare, etc., I think needs to be noted.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's helpful. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so that's been given us a good going over in terms of the health and safety report. Thank you very much for that. So over, Alexis, in terms of the update, the 6 monthly update for leadership and talent. Sorry, Lorna, were you wanting to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry for my tardiness there with the hand. It was just a couple of things in the last report. Tom's just touched on it there. One of my points was about the wellbeing. I know these things are aesthetics, but we're talking about a wellbeing budget and we're talking about Dalmarnock and, you know, what we're doing to a floor there. And it does seem to be sometimes the same buildings that get that attention. And it's the other operational environments that seem to get missed. So it was just for noting, obviously, as the same as Tom's raised. And also about the assaults during the custody process. I know but we're not measuring much about that process, but could it be that this is to do also with the length of time taken to process custodies, and is that something we could look to measure in future?
Okay, thanks for that comment, Lorna. James, is that something that could be measured in future in terms of the overall safety and welfare of both the people in custody but also officers?
Happy to continue to review that. We have looked at that in the past, but at the moment the indications are that it's more to do with the transport of custodies, but we always keep all the different trends in review, and there's regular Your Safety Matters meetings which look into it in real depth as well. So I'll continue to keep the committee informed. Okay,
that's great. Thanks very much indeed. So, Alexis, leadership and talent.
Good afternoon, thank you. I'll assume the paper has been read and we'll take the time just to go through some particular highlights. So this paper is the July to December overview, and one of the big things that we have noted is the leadership project successfully concluding in November. This ran from May 2020. And members may recall there was 3 key areas to that project, one being the My Career performance management approach that we launched earlier in the year. The second area was our police leadership development programme qualification for our new sergeants. And the final area was our accelerated leadership pathway for officers. This committee have had a deep dive into My Career, so I'm not going to spend any time specifically looking at that. However, I will say that from April this year through to the summer, we'll be starting to look at what the outputs of the My Career performance appraisals look like, both in terms of the volumes completed and actually what the performance profile is of the organisation and learning. This committee has also had an insight into the new qualification for sergeants as well, and a successful evaluation around that. And we're pleased to say that that is continuing to be really successful. And we were delighted to have our first graduation just a couple of weeks ago. So moving forward from the leadership project, I wanted to touch on the Your Leadership Matters leadership development programme, phase 2. Members will be aware that in December, the Scottish Government approved funding for this core programme for us, and Ernst & Young were confirmed as the successful bidder following a robust procurement process. So we're in full mobilisation mode with Ernst & Young at the moment, and that will continue through to March, at which point we will then launch the programme and we will see our first participants taking part in April and May. So for the committee members, a reminder about the key focus of that leadership development programme. It focuses on being a courageous leader, so doing the right thing, an inclusive leader and a collaborative leader. And it is a key enabler to our Policing Together strategy. So absolutely delighted that we're at the stage now of getting to roll that programme out. And you'll note in section 2.7, we talk about the population that's targeted at, which is sergeants upwards. We will be taking an opportunity to refresh the top 250 leaders who completed that programme, the first phase, back in 2021. So really re-engaging those leaders and ensuring that they actually help to deliver that programme with us going forward. I also want to mention a new people manager programme. This has been touched on actually throughout the meeting today at various points. So we started a short life working group in December which will run through to March. And this is with a view to planning, designing, developing and implementing a new programme of development, which focuses on developing the skills, knowledge and competence of our people managers around the areas. I call it the nuts and bolts of being a really good people manager, but quite specifically it's around grievance and workplace issues. It is around duty modifications, absence management, health and wellness, also checking in on capability, and also in general how to create and manage in a positive working environment. And there's two aspects to this training. Part of it is about the knowledge of what you need to know and our policies and procedures, and what we would describe as our how-to guides. And the second part of that training is around the skills that you need to be able to deliver those aspects effectively. And we've heard throughout today's committee why this is of a particular importance to us at this point in time. So this programme will be what I would describe as very much a blended programme for our people managers. So something that they can tap into as and when they need it and as and when issues arise, but also an ongoing skills development where we will do face-to-face training, and some of that may be virtual as we are today. So again, with that programme starting in April alongside the Your Leadership Matters programme, we are putting a clear investment into a new aspect of our leaders and our people managers at this time. And obviously throughout the paper, we talk about all the other products that we also have on the go at the moment. And I think it's fair to say that we really are focusing on how we can enable our Policing Together strategy and our people strategy going forward. And finally, before I halt, I did want to mention our new police leadership programme for executive leaders that we have started to deliver in conjunction with the UK College of Policing. I will talk in much more detail about this during the private session. However, for all committee members, the College of Policing and Deloitte conducted an independent review of the Strategic Command course and the Senior Police National Assessment Centre in December 2022. So this is across all of the UK. And as a result, the process for 2023 has now changed. And there has been a new programme created called the Police Leadership Programme for our executive leaders or future executive leaders. And it will replace the Strategic Command course going forward. So the College of Policing are working with us at the moment, as with all police forces across the UK, helping us understand what that new programme looks like. And it will feature a more continuous method of assessment throughout a 12-month period. And will be open to officers and staff who wish to be considered for our chief officer roles within the next 24-month period. But as I say, I will talk more about that in the private session. There is a lot in that paper, but I felt those were the important points to raise and happy to take any questions.
Alexis, that's really, really helpful. Thank you so much. Board members, any comments or questions? No, I had a couple of questions, Alexis. One was the reverse mentoring. I'd be interested to know how many people have taken that up. And then the other aspect was on the accelerated leadership programme. I'd be interested to see the gender split on that.
Okay, I will come back to you about the reverse mentoring. I don't have the exact numbers. It's an area that is extremely, I would say, popular, but I will come back to you with the exact numbers. So we'll make sure we get that to you. And also with accelerated leadership pathway, I do have that information, but not on me right now. So again, I'll forward that through to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much indeed.
No problem.
So if I don't have any board member questions or comments, I'll just quickly check with the Lorna, Derek and Michelle if there's anything. No, okay, that's great. Alexis, thank you very much indeed. Obviously
Chair,
a lot
sorry
of...
to
Oh,
interrupt.
sorry.
I think Michelle was wanting to come in there.
Oh, I don't see
Yeah.
your hand, Michelle, apologies.
The hand's up.
Yeah, I had my hand up, not to worry. I was wanting to come in, please, Chair, in respect of the my career, the actual the completion rates. I'm just trying to find the data in front of me. My career discussions and completion rates. I actually feel the numbers in that are quite alarmingly low, concerningly low actually. And I think, to be honest, there's definitely a lack in the organisation of people wondering whether they should participate in them or not. And I wonder if it's time to potentially just make a brave decision and say we pull this, or we think of doing something else rather than spend any more time doing the same thing over and over again. It just doesn't seem to look like it's working to me. And I've certainly been party to discussions in the past around what that career development talk should look like, but I don't think what's currently being presented is working. And is it worthwhile spending any more time, money and investment on it, or should we look at something else? Well, or should the organisation look at something else? I think it's shockingly low.
Michelle, thank you very much for your comment on your view that there's a low, and it does appear to be very low, and of course it's not mandatory, is my understanding, which does beg the question in terms of how many conversations are there between a member of staff and their manager, and how do people get feedback about how their performance is. So Alexis, I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, absolutely. What I would say is that the figures that you have in that paper would have been accurate, I believe, around about December time, and will be changing. It's fair to say that although there's not a requirement to do the My Career discussion in the last quarter, which would be January, February, March, we are aware that a lot of people have left it this year, our first year in that, into there. My understanding is that we're looking, well, as of the end of January, it was looking like 40% of the organisation had completed or were on the verge of completing. That may have changed quite dramatically. We're always a month behind with the figures, so I don't know what it'll be like now in February. So I think it'd be interesting to share that with you. The other thing that I would say is that it is a requirement to do the My Career conversation. So it has been put in as something that we all should participate in across the organisation, and we're constantly seeking feedback. And particularly when we did our proof of concept well over a year ago, the feedback was it was actually a very valuable process that people went through, and the valuable discussions that people have about their career undoubtedly came out of that proof of concept, and that was both for officers and staff. It is an important process for us, and I think particularly going forward, our officers know that this is their gateway to promotion, and we are really keen that both officers and staff do have serious conversations about their career in Police Scotland, and what we can do to support that. So what I would like to do is to, at the end of this first year, which will be the 31st of March, is to take that 3 to 6 month period of evaluation in terms of how things have gone over the year, how many people did complete their conversations, and if they didn't, why not? And those who have completed it, what went well, what do we learn from it, rather than dismissing all the great work that we have put in at this stage. So I think it's valuable to raise concerns. I would always encourage that. However, I'd like to do a very qualitative and quantitative evaluation process before any further decisions would be taken.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I think that we just now are needing to go over the action log in terms of the end of the public section of the meeting. So in terms of the sickness absence reporting, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Tom. We were to get something for this, but I think we're being advised that actually there will be a relook at reporting, and that will be included in the further MI reports. Is that a fair assumption?
That's right, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, ill health retirement, are people content that that is closed? Okay. The wellbeing initiatives, again, measured with effectiveness, will come into future future programmes, so we're content to close. And the officer wellbeing, that will be carried forwards into ongoing reports.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Is that okay? And then the Your Voice Matters is for our next meeting. So is there anything else anybody wants to raise in the public section of the meeting?
Chair, can we just look at the action that's just at the bottom of after the Your Voice Matters re-rostered rest days one?
Sorry, I didn't notice that. Is
Right,
that on the
just
next
call it off.
page? Thank you, Deborah. Right, okay. So where did we get to? It does seem still to be work in progress, but when will we have a sense then of how it's been managed and that balance of both re-rostered rest days but other additional workload? When do you think, David, we'll get a definitive view on that? I mean, recognising that re-rostered rest days are a matter for, it's within the police force and will continue to happen because rest days are re-rostered. However, when are we going to get advice on what is a reasonable number that is balanced and officers get their time back within an appropriate timescale?
I think I'd probably like to get a bit more information on my side here, because there's regulations about how these should be handled, which aren't being adhered to. And I think if we enforce how it should be done, we might be able to get ourselves to a position. But at the moment, it's not happening. I know the RDU are looking at this, but what I do want to understand is why, if we've got an agreement, are we not adhering to it? I'm talking about locally in terms of when people have to use their re-rostered rest days up. Basically, they're meant to use them up if you get duty changed at very short notice, it's meant to be given back to you in very short notice, and you're meant to kind of allocate it, and it should be then carried forward. And there are different rules at different ranks, but I do think we need a little bit of a fresh eyes on this.
So can we have just a situation report for our next meeting? Warts and all, even if we're still gathering this and we don't know yet, but actually something that comes and tells us what the situation is and what we need to do about it would be helpful.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And again, I'm quite looking forward to Katie kind of giving us a completely fresh perspective over some of this as well.
Yeah, no, that's
just tying it onto her entry.
Yeah. She's been in for long enough. Okay, so I think you're welcome. I think that is us finished the live streaming. We're moving into the private session. And I'm just saying that we will stop live